Hello and welcome to CFO Playbook. I'm David McClelland. I'm a journalist and broadcaster, and I cover technology and business with a special interest in startups. And here on CFO Playbook, I get under the skin of how world-class finance leaders from across various industries leverage technology, as well as set goals, make plans, manage teams, and much more. In today's episode, we speak with a finance advisor from one of the Big Four about strategies for creating value even in uncertain times.
It's how do we get beyond the mundane and the routine into the aspiration that we've all had, which is about business partnering and being at the heart of strategy and decision making. Finance people are very focused on certainty. They're very good at measuring cost because it's certain, it's something very tangible. But actually, the challenge is rather than racing to the bottom with efficiency, how do we actually aspire to the top?
If you're listening to CFO Playbook for the first time, then welcome. We're here every month with exclusive interviews and insights from world-class finance leaders. So hit that subscribe button, have a listen back through our extensive back catalogue too, and don't be afraid to get in touch, as many of you do. Your input helps to shape our output, so let us know who or what you'd like us to speak to in future episodes. Right, on with today's show.
This episode of the CFO Playbook is brought to you by Soldo. Thousands of businesses from small to large corporations, including Mercedes-Benz, Sony, and Get Your Guide, use Soldo to make their business spending simple and efficient. To find out more or to book a demo, visit soldo.com.
Myles Corson, Global and America's Strategy and Markets Leader, Financial Accounting Advisory Services at EY. Thank you for joining us on CFO Playbook.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of the show and some of the great insights your guests share, so it's a privilege to be here.
Oh, bless you. You say all the right things. Now, I'll name it first of all. British accent, based in the US. What's been your journey to where you are right now?
Yeah, well, thanks, David. Yeah, I've been with EY 30 years. So it was actually a bit of a milestone year for me this year. It's 30 years with EY since I joined in 94 and 15 years in New York. So I've kind of played a number of roles across EY. I've moved around internationally, but have been based in New York for the last 15 years. As you mentioned, I have a very long job title. I've been focused on building a business around financial accounting advisory services for those 15 years, but more recently have been focused on pulling together all of the EY services serving the CFO and the finance function. And as part of that, I've been leading our research on the DNA of the CFO, so really looking at the role of the CFO, how that's evolved. So some very interesting perspectives over the last 15 years of how we've seen that transition. More recently, we've just launched a piece on the DNA of the controller. So again, looking at how the individual reporting up to the CFO are enabling CFOs to be successful, but also transforming their own roles and responsibilities. And I also host the EY Better Finance podcast. So I'm on the other side of the microphone today, answering the questions rather than asking them.
Well, I hope it's not too painful experience for you. I'll do my best to make it as comfortable as possible, but we really want to pull on some of those threads that you mentioned there in terms of that understanding the DNA of senior finance leaders in what is an changing, ever-evolving world. And well, let's dive into that now. Now, I should say for our audience that as of the time of this recording, we do not know the results of the US election, although it is just around the corner. What is happening now, though, and the US election really just feeds into that, is this bigger picture of uncertainty and instability. Geopolitical tensions are high, and tragically, some of those tensions are spilling over into conflict. Inflation is under control. Perhaps it isn't. We'll see. Perhaps supply chain pinch points are being relieved, or maybe they're not all over the place. But then, of course, we've got natural disasters, digital outage disasters. That's a new term that I've coined, but I think we all know the kind of things that we're talking about there. And, well, really the list goes on. Myles, your job is to analyze, understand that bigger picture. So I'm curious as to how you look at this from an economics point of view, and what challenges do you think that this litany of instability poses to finance leaders today?
Yeah, David, well, you've kind of listed off a lot of things there. And I think the phrase that I've, kind of been really gravitating towards is this idea of polycrisis. And I think what we're seeing is the combination of more large-scale events compounding on top of each other. And, what that is meaning is it's very difficult for executives to always plan, be prepared for every eventuality, because the speed of change, the speed of disruption continues to accelerate. So what does that mean for executives? It means you need to have a clear vision of where your organization is going, where your function is going, and what personally you need to do to be ready. And so a lot of the work that we do is helping clients to really work through that. And so for me, a lot of it starts with the individual. And again, how can individuals be prepared? Because I think we all understand, in that situation of polycrisis where you have so many events compounding, having the clarity of where you're trying to go, what really matters to you personally, to your organization, helps make better decisions in those times of crisis. And it's particularly important as a leader that you're able to articulate clearly to your teams, to your executive peers, what matters. So again, in these times of crisis where it's difficult to control the message, your people are making well-informed decisions because they understand the broader vision of what you're trying to achieve as an organization.
I'm going to throw a couple of cliches in at this point. Unprecedented is a word that we've heard an unprecedented number of times over the last 4.5 years or so, to the point when, well, actually, I don't know, half the things that we talk about that are unprecedented really are. We are in unprecedented times, and this instability, this uncertainty, certainly this decade, and I don't know if there's just a way in which humans look upon history and look upon the present time, but it seems as though this uncertainty is now, to use another cliche, the new normal. And what I'm getting towards there is that stability is no longer something that we can count on. And people with far bigger brains than mine, with more of a lens onto history, might be able to agree or disagree with that. But it certainly seems as though the stage is set. The next few years, it would be unwise of us to expect anything other than uncertainty and instability. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you're right. You're right, David. It has almost become a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true, right? That's where cliches come from. And so I think we all experience this in our personal lives, in our professional lives, right? And I think what was perhaps a little bit different now is the magnifying effect of social media and just the pace with which news cycles travel now. And again, I think we all suffer from the risk of kind of getting sucked into all of the negativity sometimes. And you read any of the behavioral economists, the human aversion to loss, and that the fear factor is a far more compelling driver of behavior than the upsides and the opportunities. And so I think it's very easy to kind of get sucked into this, kind of very negative spiral. And look, you touched on a number of the the events, the crises that are happening, and these are very real, very impactful. Many of them have a very personal and social aspect that no one wants to undermine. But at the same time, I think what's really important is to be able to step away from some of that 24-hour news cycle, and again really focus on what matters, what as an individual and as a business you can control and influence, and really try and stay focused on that and navigate the disruption as best you can, because again, you're never going to be able to control everything that's coming at you, but to be able to make better informed decisions because of that understanding and that clarity may help you to filter out some of the noise from the signal.
I think one thing that we can be a bit more certain about is it's not all just negative stuff. It's not all disasters that are causing this instability and this uncertainty. We look at the catalyzing effect that technology is having on all areas of industry, and this hype cycle, this wave, call it what you will, for example, of generative AI that we are 2 years into now, I guess, and we're still kind of skirting around the top there of maybe this peak of inflated expectations. Who knows? But these are also things that feed in, not negative things, positive potentially things as well that feed into this climate of instability that leaders, not just in finance functions, are all trying to grapple with right now. And I guess it's that we use transformation as a term an awful lot. Digital transformation, for example, that impacts all across the business, whether you're in a technology function or not. And this is something else then that finance leaders also have to take on board what might be next because of things like AI, things like cloud, and how quickly that's accelerating.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, David. And, I think, again, greed or fear are powerful drivers. Technology is a great example. And I think you can either look at AI and new technologies through a positive lens of what do they create in terms of opportunity, or through the fear factor of, is this going to take jobs? And I think you look at a lot of the clients that have been successful in adopting these technologies, the opportunities from automation and from doing more routine tasks more effectively, analyzing bigger data sets is huge. But what that creates is an opportunity, particularly for finance, to spend more time on what CFOs have been telling us for 15 years really matters, which is business partnering and value creation, right? So rather than being in the back office, head down, focused on producing backward-looking reporting, it's, are you sitting side by side with your commercial peers, involved in commercial decision-making, involved in customer conversations, customer contracting earlier in the conversation? Because again, as you think about the opportunity for finance people, and I'm sure we'll come back and talk about some of the upskilling that's going to be required, that's what people tell us they're really interested in doing. And that's where, again, this conversation about how do you measure the return and the value that's being created through finance, rather than just measuring it through the lens of cost and efficiency, is a really important conversation for CFOs to be having right now. And again, you bring up the transformation word, and transformation is obviously on the minds of everybody because of all this disruption that we've been talking about. Transformation is on the agenda of every leader, every business. But I think you have to look at transformation as a tool. Transformation in itself is not an outcome. What you have to be focused on is, what is the outcome that you're trying to achieve, and how are you using transformation to get you where you need to go, whether that's through the upskilling, whether that's through how you apply technology. And I think too often, if you see transformation as the end in itself, you're at risk of actually not delivering the transformation. And we've done a bunch of research with the Oxford University Business School that really shows that many transformations fail, and a lot of the reason for that is not getting the clarity of vision right, but also not getting the human aspects right. Because as leaders, we're asking our people to go on this journey into the uncertainty, into the unknown, and for many of them it feels threatening because there's a perception that my job may be at risk. You're going to be asking me to do different things, and so you need to have your team bought in. And one of the sort of very telling data points for me on that is, where you look at the drivers of failed transformation. First of all, CFOs are more likely to have experienced a failed transformation. So 75% of CFOs have experienced a failed transformation in the last 5 years. And that compares to around about 2/3 of general executives. So clearly there is something happening in finance that makes it more likely that you are going to experience a negative outcome on transformation. And again, I think some of that may come back to this question of vision and the human centricity and getting those bits right. But one of the data points when you double click into it is, of the people that experienced failed finance transformation, 50% say they didn't understand the vision of what they were trying to achieve. And again, as you go through these multi-year journeys, that's a real issue, because people lose confidence, they lose motivation, and that's where there's a real risk that unless you can turn it around and get the transformation back on track, it can kind of spiral out of control.
To extend on the back on track metaphor there, transformation is the train, but you don't get on a train to get on the train. You get on a train to get to a destination, and you want to make sure that all of your workforce are on that train with you, so that when you step off in St Pancras, as is my station, everyone's there and everyone's been on that journey. But getting on the train isn't necessarily the point.
Yeah, Penn Station for me. I'm in New York now. So
let's double click to what one of your phrases there a bit further into this. And if this polycrisis, good word, instability, uncertainty in the future, if this is the challenge for finance leaders through a couple of different lenses, then I think there are two avenues that we could explore, well, that I would like us to explore here. There is the strategic advice for CFOs on how they can best help their organization to survive and thrive in this uncertain future. But also there's the strategic advice for CFOs themselves on how they can position themselves to survive and thrive in this uncertain future, because I think they're subtly different, aren't they? So how about we focus on the second one of those, the opportunity, the imperative perhaps for CFOs and finance directors and so on, and then we'll take a look at how they might be able to apply this to best add value to their organizations. We opened up with that International Space Station view of the world, if you like. Zoom in, the context around which finance professionals are operating right now. And as organizations are transforming, as we talked about, according to you and your research, the role of finance directors and CFOs is changing right now too. How do you see those changes?
Yeah, so David, as I mentioned, we've been looking at this through our DNA of the CFO research for 15 years. So we've obviously got a very rich data set. We survey and interview over 1,000 CFOs every 3 or so years. So we've got a pretty rich picture. And, casting my mind back to when we started this in 2009, the discussion was very much around CFOs becoming more strategic. And the question was, what did that actually mean? Like, what does it mean for a CFO to be strategic? And I think what we've seen is this evolution from CFOs having a seat at the table, helping to report against progress against strategic initiatives, into much more of a seat at the table, helping to shape and influence strategy. And that's been a big change. But I think what's been consistent over the course of the research is there's kind of 3 key themes that have come through very consistently. They obviously have adapted based on some of the specific fact patterns at the times that we do these interviews. So we had the survey last year. We did it back in 2020 when we were obviously in the throes of the pandemic, which obviously led some very specific results. But there are 3 key themes, and one thing I would say that has changed is previously we've talked about CFOs needing to balance across different dimensions and different responsibilities, and that this idea that you had to kind of find balance. I think what has changed recently is balance is no longer enough. You have to deliver high performance in every area. This kind of idea of compromise no longer resonates. So the 3 things that we've kind of talked about consistently are, first of all, you have to deliver short-term performance and results. At the same time, the and is you have to be able to invest for the long term and delivering sustainable performance. So that sort of, again, no longer it's balancing, it's you've got to deliver both. The second one is, how do you innovate and transform, to go back to the conversation we've been having, and manage your current and emerging risks and challenges? So, how do you kind of balance those two? The conversation now needs to be about how do you do both and then finally, how do you develop the new skill sets and mindsets to be effective in this very dynamic, very disrupted environment that we've been talking about, and maintain the legacy capabilities? Because no one is suggesting that anybody in finance can take their eye off the ball of doing the compliance, making sure everything is delivered on time to the quality that's expected. So again, those kind of 3 themes have been the ones that we've seen consistently. Now it's about how do you deliver high performance against both sides of each of those equations.
Those are big challenges, and there's a lot of ands in there, which is why I see the age of and in there. It's that short term and long term. It's that transform, but also keep the current plates spinning, and across the board, the bar has been raised. You've got to do them all excellently, no compromise. Develop new skill sets and mindsets and maintain legacy capabilities. That's a lot to take on board. So, I mean, of course, it all makes absolute sense. This is a tick sheet of the ideal stuff that a leader of a large organization, multinational organization, it's absolutely what you want to be in place there. But we have to recognize that there are some fundamental challenges and dichotomies there almost with keeping the different plates spinning. So how do you counsel, how do you advise, coming specifically to where you fit, finance leaders to be able to spin these plates at the same time when one's very close to you and one's far away, and running between the two of them is mentally and physically very, very difficult?
Yeah, so absolutely. So as we think about, again, what is the direction, what is the vision for future finance organizations to be successful in this disrupted environment, there are probably three key attributes we think are really important. And again, I think it's how do you bring together sort of the personal attributes with the organizational elements, both for the finance function and the broader enterprise. So I'll kind of share the three. So we believe to be successful in the future, finance organizations need to be data oriented. And, we can talk about, data versus technology, but I think too often what we see is organizations focused on technology as the solution.
The data is the fuel.
So technology, I think, is important, but what is really important is actually the data. So how is the technology allowing you to have data flows through the organization? How are you using technology on top of the data to deliver the insight and unlock the insight that you need to be successful? Again, I think there's a huge opportunity for CFOs here to be helping to shape what future organizations look like as we move into this environment where, again, we think differently about how data flows through an organization. And I'm a big fan of Cal Newport, who's written a number. He's a computer science professor at Georgetown University, but has written a number of books around deep work, slow productivity, world without email. But he makes the analogy that knowledge work, which again so many of us are focused on, is probably where the industrial world was before Henry Ford created the production line. And again, you think about the way data flows through organizations now, it's very disjointed. And he uses the term hyperactive hive mind. We've got a lot of asymmetrical flows and it's not streamlined. I think there's an opportunity for CFOs to be helping to shape what the architecture of a future organization looks like. There's much more designed around the way data flows, making sure you have the right people with the right information at the right time, making informed decisions. And again, so technology is a part of that, but I think this mindset of data orientation is really important, and particularly in this environment where the volumes of data are growing exponentially. We're all seeing different sources of data in the finance context. Now it's going beyond just the traditional finance data into non-financial data, sustainability, reporting, all those kind of things. So it's just growing exponentially. So data strategy, data governance is a really important thing to get right. We've kind of touched on the second aspect, which is human centricity, and whatever the future looks like, you have to understand the human aspects. And I was very lucky. We had Tom Peters come and speak at an event that we organised a number of years ago. It was pre-pandemic. I think he was probably in his mid-70s at that point. He's obviously, I think, had his 80th birthday last year. But he was the sort of founder of business literature with In Search of Excellence, which he published back in the 70s. But it was amazing that he describes himself as a rabid people person, and it was interesting. He was so passionate about the fact he's been telling everybody, and showing that why human centricity is so important, and the business really is people, and yet we so often forget about that, and it's why many organizations struggle. So that sort of business is people, it's leaders leading employees, serving customers is foundational. So that human piece key, and then finally, really getting the value focus is important. And what we mean by that is, as a CFO, do you really understand how, as an organization, as an enterprise, you're creating value? Do you understand how, as a finance function, you're supporting that value creation? And do you understand, as an individual, how you're supporting it? And particularly, I think for finance leaders, is do you really understand the perception of your function within the enterprise, right? So again, to go back to this question of business partnering, how do your internal customers, the users of your team, actually perceive you? And I think very few finance organizations really do that sort of internal NPS type score. Actually go out and ask your customers how your team is perceived. Because if your goal and aspiration is to be a business partner, do the commercial functions see you as someone that they value having at the table? Or actually, do they see you as the person that's going to tell them to cut cost and say no because we can't afford those kind of things? And on one of the episodes of the podcast that's coming up, I spoke to Wayne Andrews, who's the CFO at University of Sydney and has had a long, storied career in Asia Pac. But he summarized it brilliantly for me and very succinctly, which is there are two key questions he uses with his executive team around finance, which is, do you trust us? And do you value having us at the table? And to me, what that really neatly summarizes is this kind of, circle we've talked about the finance responsibilities for value protection, which is the traditional, role, compliance, making sure the numbers and reporting are done on time and to the standards. The value optimization, which is, how do we make sure we're driving efficiency, that we're managing resources effectively, we're allocating resources effectively. And then finally, and most importantly right now, and where I think, again, high-performing finance organizations are focused, is on the value creation piece.
And just reflecting on some of the data from the report that you shared, and again, focusing on the individuals here, about the opportunities for individuals, for finance controllers, CFOs, whoever, to create value within an organization. There are some challenges there, and the data is quite stark. 86% expect their role to change significantly within the next 5 years, and more than a quarter are anticipating a very different and unknown skill set compared with today. So we were talking about the challenges that finance professionals face, both spinning that near-term plate and a plate somewhere in the future. But what picture this paints is when you're looking at your own ability, your own capability to create value from what you bring to the organization. You might know what the near-term plate is, but the vast majority of people are saying that far-term plate, 5 years away, I don't even know where it is. How can I spin that if I don't know what it looks like? Is it a square plate? Is it a round plate? 26% of respondents don't know and say that they aren't going to know yet. So that's another challenge. So I guess, we're talking, and we'll talk in a moment about having the near-term view, being able to make long-term strategy decisions and balance the risks there. But from an individual point of view, from a development, from a upskilling, right-skilling and value creation point of view, you also need to have an idea as to what your opportunities are to add value, even though you don't know exactly what they're going to be. The best you can do is kind of set a direction, have a hunch that AI, data, whatever it is that you've mentioned, are going to be areas for growth and for potential value creation.
Yeah, so great points. And the data you referenced, David, is actually from the DNA of the controller survey. So this is a piece that we've done. And again, part of the reason that we've kind of expanded the research to look at the direct reports of the CFO is because if CFOs are going to be successful, they need to be upskilling and enabling the team around them. And that's one of the key findings from the CFO research. It's like you can't do this yourself. You have to be building the strength of team around you. But I think what did resonate, and to go back to that point you made around the pivot to value creation, that was particularly interesting because this is in a controller context, a financial controller. So again, the individuals that probably the brand and perception historically has been these are the accountants, the people that are very focused on compliance and the backward-looking reporting. But as you say, almost 90% of them, 9 in 10, are saying we see a fundamental shift and transformation in our role in the next 5 years, and they're unclear what that is, but they do, in very significant numbers, expect to have more of a focus on value creation. So I think that is a really interesting finding. As we kind of looked at some of the data from our corporate reporting survey, we've been looking at this gap between investor expectations and preparer expectations. So what we hear consistently is this gap between investors saying we want to see investment in long-term performance. We're actually willing to forgo some short-term profit and results if it's in the service of delivering long-term performance. So almost 80% of the investors that we spoke to would say that they're willing to make that trade-off. And on the other side of the equation, again, the majority of CFOs, almost 60%, will also say they want to make that trade-off. And yet what we consistently hear is this, but we're under pressure from our analyst investors to deliver short-term performance at the expense of everything else. And when you really sort of drill into it, one of the big challenges or concerns that comes through is investors and analysts, we would say continuously, they don't, in many cases, understand what investments are being made and whether those investments are being made consistently. They don't understand what long-term investments organizations are making, or clearly how the activities that are being talked about are serving that long-term performance. And so there is this issue. And the reason for some of that concern from analysts is this inconsistency in what they hear from executive teams. And what we found was that 2/3 of the CFOs have experienced disagreements in the executive team and in the boardroom about these long-term priorities. And that's, pretty interesting. And on the one hand, you can look at it through the lens of actually, disagreement is positive. You want different perspectives, you want, different views to get to better outcomes. What is really important though, is you have to get to a commitment and a commitment to message the same information consistently. Now, you may never get to consensus, but as a leadership team, you have to get to commitment. And again, I think one of the opportunities for CFOs is playing a role in those executive teams, to bring the data, to bring the insight, and be a part of the convener of that commitment. And it's really important right now, particularly in an AI world, where again, analysts are analyzing vast sets of data. They're able to look at all of these things that are publicly available from organizations and pick up where these inconsistencies exist. So that's just, again, an example where I think there's a very tangible role for CFOs to play in contributing to that value agenda.
Yeah, and this leads us on to kind of where I wanted to take part 3 of our conversation, really, in terms of how best to apply this value creation approach to how in best supporting organizations trying to survive these difficult times. And in a way, what you're talking about there is being a compass for the company, evidence-based. We're talking about the importance of data here, and if there's one thing that you talk about getting that data right, that means that you've got evidence, so that when you are able to advise, suggest, whatever, that you have got the evidence base behind you. It strikes me that a lot of what we're talking about here is, and a lot of what I know you've spoken about in the past, is helping CFOs to understand the role that they can play to be the co-pilot to the other board members there. Other conversations that I have with CDOs, chief data officers, or CIOs and so on, there's similar conversations happening in this space as well. And each of them is looking at the assets that they have available to them about how they can bring their experience and bring their lens on the organization into discussions at the table, so that they can all feed into the overall strategy and overall the company has a better set of data in order to choose that direction. But coming back to a point that you made a moment ago, disagreements are going to happen in that case, aren't they? Because more people now are bringing their evidence to the table. Surely that those, if not differences of opinion, then certainly different viewpoints on that are somewhat inevitable. But those are good conversations to have, right? Rather than one person steamrolling it. If everyone's bringing something to the table, then hopefully the outcome's only going to be a positive one.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and this idea of the CFO as compass, I think, is a really powerful analogy, and to me, it works at a couple of different levels. So the first one is as a compass within that executive team, and to your point, I do think that CFOs have this unique purview across all dimensions of the organization, and again, it's probably a cliche, but I think it's a cliche because it's true. And I think the other thing that the research has shown us consistently is the strength of the relationship between CFO and CEO and how powerful that is. And I was listening to an episode of the Kyriba Liquid podcast with Melissa DiDonato, the CEO there, and she talked about the dynamic duo of her and her relationship with the CFO. And that, I think, really was a good articulation of what we see in many cases, the importance of that relationship at the center of executive relationships. And that's something I think, again, the CFOs have a great platform to build from. So that's important. The other lens I look at the compass analogy through is going back to this navigating through disruption and transformation. And I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit, David, in some of your comments earlier. And this visibly came to mind for me reading a book called Hidden Potential by Adam Grant. And he talks about it in the context of training and unlocking potential. But he uses this analogy of the compass versus the roadmap. And again, you think about it, and maybe for many of the younger listeners, these analogies don't work because everything's the sat nav on your phone or in your car.
I'm following a blue dot around on my phone, right?
Yeah. Those of us that actually have had to use an A to Z or a roadmap at some point, hopefully this resonates, or even a physical compass. But again, you think about it when you go on a long journey, you don't need the roadmap in your immediate environment, because most of the time, if you're leaving from home, you're pretty comfortable with the environment around you. You know that it's kind of known to you. It's very very comfortable, and you can probably navigate your way to the major arterial road to get in the general direction of where you want to go. But where you really need the roadmap is in the last few miles of trying to get to your destination. And I think in the context of what we're talking about with disruption, that's a very good analogy, because actually a compass is a far better tool when you are navigating towards the unknown. Right? It's do you understand the direction, the compass bearing you're trying to go on? And actually, are you able to use that to course correct as you go on the journey? And then, ultimately, as you get closer, you need more of a roadmap and something more tangible. And I think particularly with the speed of technology, the way things are transforming right now, it's very difficult to have a detailed roadmap of where we're trying to go, because, to your point, the destination is frankly uncertain and in many cases moving. So again, I think one of the things I encourage leaders to think about is that analogy about, are you setting the right compass direction? Are you empowering your people to understand that North Star or that compass bearing so that they can make better informed decisions to stay on course? And finally, keep adapting as you move forward. And as you get closer, you need to have the roadmap to get to conclusion, to be able to finish things. But to me, it's a very powerful analogy for leaders to think about.
And then applying that to the strategic direction, North Star, call it what you will, is one thing. But when it actually comes to putting money on the table and making those investments, big bets, call them what you will, they say fortune favors the brave, but I'm sure there are many examples in history that show us that there are brave decisions that have been made that have fallen on their face as well. So when we have the imperative for both short-term and long-term, and that long-term being uncertain, what can you do to try and trip the odds in your favor, or in more practical terms, how can you manage the risk that investing in the unknown poses to you?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the big challenges that we see consistently through the research and through our conversations with clients, and particularly in the context of big ticket transformation items like ERP implementation, right? Because of the pace of change, because of the costs associated with some of these, I think there is reticence and concern about making some of those big investments, particularly where things are changing so fast. So I think the real opportunity for CFOs to think about, how do we bring some of the agile mindsets, the sprints, to make progress, to build momentum, to get the organization comfortable with that innovation experience, recognizing that because of the magnitude of some of these things that we're trying to transform, at some point incrementality isn't going to be enough, and you probably do need to pull the trigger on the big ticket. But it's, have you done everything you can to de-risk and de-cost those big ticket transformation items, such that when you're ready to go, you're moving forward with confidence?
Before we go, there's a question that we ask to every guest on CFO Playbook, and it is, what does liberate finance mean to them, and how by doing so it might enable us all to accomplish a little bit more? So, Myles, my sort of parting question for today is, what does liberate finance, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love the question because it touches on so many things that we've talked about, but it's how do we get beyond the mundane and the routine into the aspiration that we've all had, which is about business partnering and being at the heart of strategy and decision making. And there's a great quote from Rory Sutherland, who's the vice chairman of Oakleby and Mather in the UK, and he gives a great sort of outside-in perspective on finance, which is the perception that finance people are very focused on certainty. They're very good at measuring cost because it's certain, it's something very tangible. But actually, the challenge is rather than racing to the bottom with efficiency, how do we actually aspire to the top? And he has this great quote that a missed opportunity isn't measured on a balance sheet. And I think for any leader, anybody embarking on a finance transformation, how do you start to pivot from actually looking at the return side of the equation rather than just focusing on the investment and the input? Because I think there is a great story for finance leaders to tell about the value that is being delivered, but we've got to articulate that. We've got to be showing our other executives why the dollar invested in finance is returning value to the business, in many cases above and beyond other investments. So making the case for resource allocation in finance is important, particularly because of some of the investments I think are going to be required.
You're right, that speaks very much to what we've been chatting about for the last 40 or so minutes. I love hearing Rory Sutherland quotes. I've had the privilege of working with some of his behavioral science team in the past, and those words, those quotes resonate far and wide. So it's no surprise to hear them popping up here as well. Myles, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom, the benefit of your a while now at EY, and also from the reports and the insights that you've gained from speaking with so many finance leaders from around the world. We'll put a link to the report in the show notes here. But for now, Myles Corson, thank you for joining us on CFO Playbook.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.